Welcome to Assessment of Learning 2. This subject is intended to help you in building understanding in abilities in designing and applying alternative types of assessment and grading system for respective areas in K-12 program. It is anchored on the prescribed and expected competencies of future teachers as mandated by the Commission on Higher Education or CHED. The lessons contained in this video are the 10 selected essential topics of the course, which are simply explained for easier and faster understanding. Good day everyone, let us proceed to lesson 1, which is outcome-based assessment. I am Mr. Jonathan Toledo, your instructor for this subject, Assessment of Learning 2, and I'm glad to welcome you all in my class. You can contact me on my Facebook account and also to my Gmail. For more videos, you can also subscribe to my channel. Thank you. First, I will provide a summary of this lesson using this mind map. Okay, the topic that we will discuss is outcome-based assessment. So we have here learning objectives, a review. So napakahalaga ng review para mas maintindihan niyo yung topic na ito. So i-review natin yung mga natutunan ninyo dun sa assessment of learning 1. Okay, of course, overview para makatulong din sa ating lesson. Okay, we have definitions, comparison of outcome-based assessment from traditional assessment. Napakahalaga nito para mas maintindihan ninyo yung pagkakaiba ng traditional assessment sa outcome-based assessment. And then we have also the sources of student expected learning outcome, characteristic of good learning outcomes. And this is very important. I will give you a sample output of student learning outcomes. Okay? So our learning objectives, at the end of the lesson, you will be able to have a full understanding about outcome-based assessment. Can you also differentiate the outcome-based assessment from traditional assessment? Lastly, you will create an outcome-based assessment in any selected topic from any of your modules. Okay, those are our learning objectives for this lesson. Okay, so dito na tayo. So what is assessment? Okay, let us very clear to the definition of assessment para mas maintindihan natin what is outcome-based assessment. So let us first define assessment. So when we say assessment, it is the process of gathering quantitative or qualitative data for the purpose of making decisions or providing feedback. Okay, I will give you a scenario about assessment. For instance, teacher Atan delivered a lesson, and at the end of the discussion, he wanted to see if his students understood the lessons. As a result, he must administer a test, and that particular test is considered as assessment. After analyzing the result, he discovered that the majority of his students had 4 scores. So, what should teacher Atan do? So, he will of course reteach the lessons. Okay, therefore, assessment is used by teachers in order to make informed decision. So, why we do assessment? Bakit nga ba? Bakit nga ba tayo nagkakandak o nagbibigay ng assessment sa ating mga student? We have here 3 main purposes of assessment. Number 1 is assessment for learning or AFL. When we say assessment for learning, take note of the word for, Okay, so when we say assessment for learning, occurs when teachers utilize assumption about student development to inform their instruction. Okay, so nangyayari ito at the end of the lesson. So nagkakandak tayo ng formative test para makita natin kung may naintindihan ba talaga yung bata dun sa particular lesson natin sa araw na yan. Okay, so that is assessment for learning. Okay, next. Assessment of learning. So next purpose of assessment is what we call assessment of learning, or AOL. When teachers utilize evidence of students learning to evaluate student success in relation to the goals and standards, we do summative. So this is what we call summative test. So when we say assessment of learning, so we assess the student at the end of the quarter or the course. Okay, so that's number 2 purpose of assessment. The third purpose of assessment is what we call assessment as learning. So this occurs when students reflect on and monitor their progress in order to determine their future learning goals. Okay, this is the highest form of assessment. Okay, actually ito ay laging ginagawa ngayon na tayo ay nasa distance learning. You need to have self-assessment. Okay, so this is assessment as learning, and this is the highest form of assessment. So we understand the purposes of assessment. Now let us go to overview. In educational system, we have what we call traditional education. So sa traditional education, we do traditional assessment. But traditional education system are losing their significance in the age of globalization. All things change very quickly and continually, especially in our situation nowadays. More skills are needed to develop technology very rapidly. In order to deal with these technological developments, academic organizations like Northern Quezon College Incorporated should generate globally competitive graduates. Therefore, it is compulsory to move from traditional education to outcome-based education to overcome the necessity. Outcome-based education actually became the fundamental philosophy in higher education in the Philippines lately because of the CHED Memorandum number 46 series of 2012 mandates outcome-based education standards for higher education institution. And this memorandum, naka-align din siya dun sa Enhanced Basic Education curriculum na nangyari noong 2012, morely popular called K-12 curriculum. Okay, so yun yung pagbabago dun sa educational system natin. Now, let us define outcome-based education first before we define the outcome-based assessment. Okay, when we say outcome-based education or OBE, it is a model of education that rejects the traditional focus on what the school provides to the students in favor of making students demonstrate that they know and are able to do what the required outcomes are. And the transforming of educational landscape from being input-based learning to outcome real-world knowledge and skills of learning. Okay, so yun ang outcome-based education. So sa outcome-based education, naka-anchored yung outcome-based assessment. And outcome-based assessment focuses on the assessment task to the intended learning outcome set before the curricular presentation. Knowing what is expected from learners by their teachers at the end of a particular lesson helps them to meet those targets successfully. Okay, to make it more clearly, let's take a look with the comparison of traditional education assessment from outcome-based education assessment. Okay. So, in traditional education assessment, learners are passive, while in outcome-based education assessment, learners are active. The approach is exam-driven in traditional, while in outcome-based, critical thinking and reasoning is encouraged. The curriculum and syllabus is content-based in traditional education assessment, while in outcome-based assessment, content is relevant to real-life situations. And learning is teacher-centered in traditional education assessment, while in outcome-based, learning is learner-centered. Syllabus are rigid and non-negotiable in traditional education assessment, while in outcome-based education assessment, learning programs allow teachers to be innovative and creative. Yun yung kagandahan sa outcome-based. Ang teacher nagiging innovative. Sa traditional education assessment, teachers are responsible for learning. Okay. Kaya dati, tinatanong pagka hindi natuto yung bata, anong nagawa mo? Okay, anong nagawa ng guro? But in outcome-based education assessment, itong kagandahan dito, learners are responsible for learning. Okay, now, from outcome-based education, we do outcome-based assessment, and sa outcome-based assessment, we have what we call student learning outcome. Ito ang pinakamahalaga sa outcome-based assessment, yung student learning outcomes. When we say student learning outcome, it is the totality of accumulated knowledge, skills, and attitudes that student develop during a course of study, and this serve as the basis for assessing the extent of learning in outcome-based education or OBE. Ang learning outcome na pinuproduce natin nowadays should be holistic, hindi lang basta knowledge, kundi nadidevelop din yung skills and attitudes or values ng ating mga estudyante. Okay, let's go to sources of student expected learning outcome. Para ma-sure natin na maganda yung maging kahinatnan ng outcome ng ating estudyante, we should align to these sources. Okay, number one, the mission statement of the school. Okay, so, bawat school may tinatawag tayong mission statement, vision and mission statement. So, the learning outcome should be aligned to the mission statement of the school. Okay, number two, mandated policies on competence and standards issued by the government education agencies. Okay, so dapat yung learning outcome nakabatay dun sa curriculum na binigay. Okay, dun sa mga competencies na nakasaad dun sa curriculum, sa learning guide na binaba ng CHED, ng DepEd. Okay. So, number 3, competencies are expected by different professions, businesses, in industries. Okay, and then yung competency, dapat siya ay kung BSEd, kung BSBA, dapat naka-align din doon. Okay? So, number 4, development plan and goals as well as the current trust of both national and local governments. That's why we have what we call the contextualized and localized module. Para yung nakalagay doon, yung teaching natin na naka-align hindi lang sa national, kundi dun sa local area natin, local setting. Okay. Bukod sa mas madaling maintindihan yung ating lesson, yung need dun sa ating local government or sa ating locality ay nasusuportahan din nung ating teaching. Okay? Next, current global trends and developments so that graduates can compete globally. Okay. 6, general 21st century skills focus on the following: oral and written communication, quantitative reasoning ability together with a scientific methodology, analyzing, synthesizing, and developing creative solutions, use of technology, information literacy. Before we go to the characteristics of a good learning outcome, we should understand the assessment cycle. Okay. First, we define learning outcomes. Okay. Kailan ba nangyayari na nagde-define tayo ng learning outcomes? Ito ay nangyayari if we do lesson plan dun sa learning objectives. Dapat clear na clear doon kung ano yung gusto natin na maging learning outcomes dun sa ating mga bata. Okay, next, assess learning outcomes, analyze results, and lastly, recommend changes. Okay. So, okay, now let's proceed to characteristics of a good learning outcome. Okay, number one, very specific and use words. Okay, ito yung unang-unang natin ginagawa doon sa ating lesson plan, doon sa ating learning objectives. Doon, dapat klaro na kung ano yung magiging outcome o yung goals natin doon sa ating lesson. Okay, sabi rito, learning outcome should be very specific and use verbs that make expectation clear. By being very specific, it informs students of the standards by which they will be assessed and ensure that student and instructor goals in the course are aligned. Number two, focus on the learner. Rather than explaining what the instructor will do in the course, good learning outcomes describe knowledge or skills that the student will employ and help the learner understand why that knowledge and those skills are useful and valuable for their personal, professional, and academic future. Number three, our learning outcomes should be realistic. All passing students should be able to demonstrate the knowledge or skill described by the learning outcome at the conclusion of the course. In this way, learning outcomes establish standards for the course. Number 4, focus on the application and integration of acquired knowledge and skills. Good learning outcomes reflect and indicate the ways in which the described knowledge and skills may be used by the learner now and in the future. Number 5, good learning outcomes prepare students for assessment and help them feel engaged in the empowered by the assessment and evaluation process. Number 6, offer a timeline for completion of the desired learning. At this point, I will give you sample output of student learning outcomes. Our topic is circle and its parts or the terms related to it. Ang grade level natin, subject and grade level is Mathematics 9. At the end of the 1-hour period or 60-minute lesson, the student should be able to first, identify the parts of a circle. Number 2, illustrate a circle in the terms related to it: center, radius, diameter, chord, secant, and tangent. Number 3, develop the value of determination in acquiring the skill. As you can see, we have here knowledge, skills, and attitude para holistic yung ating learning outcomes. And as you can see, ito ay nakatungkol din sa development ng bata. Of course, hindi dun sa guro. And then, we use verb. Okay. And then, meron din tayo ditong timeline. 60-minute lesson or 1 hour. That's all for today. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something. See you to the next lesson. God bless everyone.